The stagecoach rattled into Julesburg, Colorado territory, in the scorching summer of 1868, carrying among its passengers a young woman whose desperate French pleas for help went unanswered by every confused face that turned her way. Brigitte Rousseau stepped down from the coach on trembling legs, her dark hair matted with dust from the 3-week journey, her hazel eyes wide with terror as she clutched a carpetbag that contained everything she owned in this strange new world. The driver dumped her single trunk onto the wooden boardwalk without ceremony and climbed back onto his perch, leaving her standing alone in front of the weathered general store. She tried again, her voice breaking as she addressed a passing woman in a calico dress. "Est-il vous plate, Madame G. Church mon oncle, Monsieur Pierre Blanchard. Connaissez-vous cet homme?" The woman shook her head, backing away from Brigitte's foreign words as if they carried some contagion, and hurried down the dusty street. Brigitte's heart hammered in her chest. 3 months ago, her Uncle Pierre had written to her parents in Lyon, promising her work and a home if she could make the passage to America. Her parents, desperate to secure her future after her father's printing business collapsed, had scraped together every franc for her passage. Pierre was supposed to meet her here in Julesburg, where he worked as a surveyor for the railroad company pushing ever westward. But Pierre was nowhere to be seen. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town. Wooden buildings lined the single main street, their false fronts creating an illusion of grandeur that the ramshackle structures behind them betrayed. Horses stood hitched to posts, swishing their tails at persistent flies. Men in dusty clothes moved between the saloon, the livery stable, and various shops with purposeful strides. No one met her eyes. No one stopped to help. Brigitte's throat tightened. She had $12 in American currency sewn into her petticoat, the address of a boarding house her uncle had mentioned in his letter, and not a single word of English beyond hello and thank you, which she had practiced religiously on the ship crossing the Atlantic. "Excusez-moi," she tried again, approaching an older man with a gray beard who sat outside what appeared to be a saloon. "G. Church la pension de Madame Sullivan." The man stared at her, then spit tobacco juice into the dirt. "Don't speak no French, girl. You lost or something." She recognized the questioning tone, if not the words. "Madame Sullivan," she repeated desperately, pulling a crumpled paper from her bag with the address written in her uncle's careful hand. The man squinted at it, then pointed down the street. 2 buildings down on the right. Yellow Place. Brigitte nodded vigorously, understanding his gesture even if the words remained foreign sounds. "Thank you," she managed in heavily accented English. She dragged her trunk along the wooden boardwalk, her arms aching with the effort. The yellow building revealed itself to be a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that reads Sullivan's Boarding House. Brigitte knocked on the door, her knuckles rapping hopefully against the weathered wood. A heavy-set woman with iron-gray hair and a suspicious expression opened the door. She looked Brigitte up and down with sharp blue eyes. "We're full up," she said, and started to close the door. "Attendez, wait." Brigitte thrust the letter forward. "Pierre Blanchard, mon oncle, my uncle." The woman's expression shifted slightly, recognition flickering across her features. She took the letter and read it quickly. "You're Pierre's niece, from France." Brigitte nodded eagerly, catching the familiar name. "Oui, yes, Pierre Blanchard." The woman's face softened, but only marginally. "I'm Mrs. Sullivan. Your uncle stayed here for a spell, but he left 3 weeks back. Said something about a surveying job up in the mountains. Didn't mention nothing about a niece coming." The words were meaningless sounds to Brigitte, but the tone conveyed something ominous. She felt tears prick at her eyes. "Pierre," she said again, Looking around as if her uncle might materialize from thin air, Mrs. Sullivan sighed heavily. She opened the door wider and gestured for Brigitte to enter. "Come on in then. Can't leave you standing in the street like some lost puppy. We'll figure something out." The interior of the boarding house was dim and smelled of boiled vegetables and lye soap. A narrow staircase led to the second floor, and several closed doors suggested the presence of other boarders. Mrs. Sullivan led Brigitte to a small parlor with worn furniture and gestured for her to sit. "Pierre," Mrs. Sullivan said slowly and loudly, as if volume might bridge the language barrier. "In the mountains. Gone 3 weeks." Brigitte's stomach dropped. She understood mountains. She understood gone. She clutched her carpetbag tighter. "Quand reviendra-t-il? When return?" Mrs. Sullivan spread her hands helplessly. "Don't know, girl. Could be weeks. Could be months. Those surveying jobs take time." They stared at each other across the gulf of language, both women recognizing the impossibility of real communication. Finally, Mrs. Sullivan stood and motioned for Brigitte to follow her upstairs. She led the young woman to a tiny room under the eaves, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but clean and private. "You can stay tonight," Mrs. Sullivan said, holding up one finger. "One night. After that, you need to find work or move on. I run a business, not a charity." Brigitte understood nothing except the single raised finger. She nodded anyway, too exhausted to do anything else. Mrs. Sullivan left, closing the door behind her, and Brigitte collapsed onto the bed, finally allowing the tears she had held at bay for so long to flow freely. What had she done? She had traveled halfway around the world on the promise of a new life, only to find herself stranded in a place where no one understood her, and she understood no one. Her parents would be frantic with worry when they received her letter from New York explaining the final leg of her journey. By the time any correspondence could reach them and return, months would have passed. She was utterly, completely alone. That night, Brigitte lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. Raucous laughter drifted from the saloon down the street. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried. She thought of her mother's warm kitchen in Lyon, of her younger sisters chattering around the dinner table, of the comfortable predictability of the life she had left behind. Pride had prevented her from admitting her terror at leaving. She had wanted to be brave, to be the daughter who saved the family through her courage and sacrifice. Now that courage seemed like foolishness. Morning came too quickly. Brigitte washed her face in the basin and changed into her least travel-worn dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days. She plaited her dark hair into a neat braid and pinned it around her head in the style her mother had taught her. Whatever happened, she would face it with dignity. Mrs. Sullivan was in the kitchen when Brigitte descended, stirring a pot of what smelled like oatmeal. 2 other boarders, both men in work clothes, sat at a scarred wooden table eating their breakfast in silence. They glanced up at Brigitte with casual curiosity but said nothing. "Sit, Mrs. Sullivan commanded, pointing at an empty chair. She ladled oatmeal into a bowl and set it before Brigitte with a spoon and a cup of weak coffee. "Merci," Brigitte murmured. "Thank you." Mrs. Sullivan sat down across from her with her own cup of coffee and regarded the young woman thoughtfully. "I've been thinking," she said. "There's a man who comes into town every few weeks for supplies. Lives up in the mountains by himself, trapping and hunting. Name is Wade Garrison. He's been around these parts for years, keeps to himself mostly, but he's honest and fair. I heard tell he spent time up in Canada before he came down here. Might be he knows some French. If anyone could help you track down your uncle, it might be him." The words meant nothing to Brigitte, but she caught the serious tone and nodded as if she understood. "He comes in for supplies regular," Mrs. Sullivan continued, mostly talking to herself now. "Should be due any day now. If I can get him to help you, maybe he could take you up into the mountains to find Pierre, or at least translate so we can figure out what you need." One of the men at the table spoke up. "Wade Garrison, that mountain man. You really think he'll help some foreign girl?" "Wade's got his own code," Mrs. Sullivan said firmly. "He might seem rough, but he's helped folks before. Remember when the Martin family got lost in that storm 2 winters back? Wade found them and brought them in safe." The man grunted, unconvinced, but said nothing more. After breakfast, Mrs. Sullivan made it clear through gestures that Brigitte needed to earn her keep. She handed the young woman a broom and pointed at the parlor floor. Brigitte set to sweeping with more vigor than skill, grateful for any task that kept her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into panic. The day dragged by with excruciating slowness. Brigitte swept, dusted, and helped Mrs. Sullivan prepare a simple dinner for the boarders. The landlady was not unkind, but neither was she particularly warm. She ran her establishment with brisk efficiency and expected the same from everyone in it. That evening, Brigitte sat in the parlor after dinner, trying to mend a tear in one of her chemises by the light of an oil lamp. Her eyes ached from the strain, and her fingers felt clumsy with exhaustion and stress. The future stretched before her like an endless, incomprehensible maze. How was she supposed to find work when she could not speak to potential employers? How was she supposed to survive? The next morning began much like the first. Brigitte rose early, washed, dressed, and descended to the kitchen to help with breakfast. She was setting out plates when the front door opened and heavy footsteps sounded in the hall. "Mrs. Sullivan," a deep male voice called out. "You got any of that coffee ready?" "Wade Garrison, as I live and breathe," Mrs. Sullivan said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "You're right on time. Come on in here. I need to talk to you." The man who ducked through the doorway into the kitchen was unlike anyone Brigitte had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the space and arms thick with muscle visible beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeves. His chest was massive, straining against the worn fabric of his shirt, and his hands were large and calloused, the hands of a man who worked with them daily. His hair was dark brown and hung past his shoulders in waves that looked like they had been tied back recently, but had come loose. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were startlingly clear, a blue-gray like storm clouds, and they took in everything with the alert watchfulness of a man who lived by his wits and strength. He removed his hat, a battered felt thing that had seen better days, and nodded politely to Mrs. Sullivan. Then his eyes landed on Brigitte, and he paused, surprise flickering across his features. "Wade, this here is Brigitte," Mrs. Sullivan said. "She came in on the stage 2 days ago looking for her uncle, Pierre Blanchard. Problem is, she only speaks French. Can't understand a word of English. I thought maybe you might know enough French from your time up in Canada to help translate." Wade's eyes remained on Brigitte, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush. She looked down at the plate in her hands, suddenly conscious of her shabby dress and work-worn appearance. "Bonjour," Wade said slowly, his accent atrocious but the word unmistakable. Brigitte's head snapped up, her eyes wide with hope. "Vous parlez français?" she asked eagerly. "You speak French?" Wade held up his hand, fingers pinched together. "Un petit peu, un tout petit peu." "A little bit. A very little bit." His pronunciation was terrible, but Brigitte did not care. Here was someone who understood at least some of what she said. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that she had to blink back tears. Mrs. Sullivan watched this exchange with satisfaction. "Can you help her, Wade?" "She needs to find her uncle, or at least figure out how to get by until he comes back to town. Wade pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Sullivan poured for him. He looked at Brigitte again, and this time she saw something like sympathy in those storm-colored eyes. "Tell me what happened," he said in slow, careful French that was grammatically questionable but understandable. "Why are you here alone?" The words tumbled out of Brigitte in a rush. She explained about her uncle's letter, her parents' financial troubles, the long journey from France, arriving in Julesburg to find Pierre gone. Wade listened carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked to understand her rapid speech. Occasionally, he asked her to repeat something or to speak more slowly. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee and thinking. Finally, he turned to Mrs. Sullivan and switched back to English. Her Uncle Pierre promised her a job and a home, but he went up into the mountains on a surveying job about 3 weeks ago. She doesn't know when he is coming back. She has almost no money and no English. She is asking what she should do. Mrs. Sullivan nodded. "That is about what I figured." "Poor thing. What do you think? Should she wait here? Try to find work somehow?" Wade drummed his fingers on the table. "Pierre Blanchard. I know him a little. Good man, knows his business." The surveying crew he joined was heading up toward the Wyoming border, mapping for the railroad. "That is rough country up there. They could be gone another month or more." He turned back to Brigitte and repeated this information in his halting French. Brigitte's face fell. A month or more. How could she survive that long in a town where she could not communicate, could not work, could not even ask for help? "Je ne sais pas quoi faire," she whispered. "I do not know what to do." Wade studied her for another long moment. Then he sighed heavily as if coming to a decision he was not entirely sure about. "I can teach you English," he said in French. "Basic things. Enough to get by. It will take time, but you are stuck here anyway waiting for your uncle." Brigitte stared at him. "You would do that. But why?" "You do not know me." Wade shrugged his massive shoulders. "I know what it is like to be lost in a place where you do not speak the language. When I first went up to Canada, I barely knew any French. The trappers I worked with, they helped me learn. They did not have to, but they did. Maybe I pay that kindness forward." He switched back to English to explain his offer to Mrs. Sullivan. The landlady's eyebrows rose. "You are going to teach her English? Wade Garrison, since when are you a school teacher?" "Since right now, I guess," Wade said gruffly. "It is not like I have anything better to do. I came down for supplies anyway. I can stay in town a week or two, work odd jobs to pay for my room and teach her enough English to function. After that, she is on her own." Mrs. Sullivan looked between Wade and Brigitte, calculation in her eyes. "All right then. She can stay on here and keep helping me around the house to earn her keep. You can use the parlor for your lessons when it is empty. But Wade, this girl is respectable. Her uncle is a known man in these parts. You treat her with respect, you hear me?" Wade's expression turned stony. "I have never been anything but respectful to women, Mrs. Sullivan, and I am not about to start doing otherwise now." I know," Mrs. Sullivan said, waving her hand. "I just wanted to be clear, for her sake and yours. People will talk no matter what, but we will keep it all above board." Wade turned back to Brigitte and explained the arrangement in French. She listened, her heart pounding with renewed hope. This massive, intimidating mountain man was offering to help her, asking nothing in return. It seemed too good to be true, but what choice did she have? "I accept," she said softly. "Merci, thank you, I will work hard to learn." "Good," Wade said. He drained his coffee cup and stood. "We start tomorrow morning. Meet me in the parlor after breakfast. Bring paper and a pencil if you have them." He nodded to Mrs. Sullivan, jammed his hat back on his head and left without another word, his heavy footsteps receding down the hall and out the front door. Mrs. Sullivan and Bridget looked at each other. "Well," the landlady said, "that is Wade Garrison for you. Man of few words, but when he says he will do something, he does it. You are lucky he came to town when he did." Bridget did not understand the words, but she understood the general sentiment. She was lucky. Improbably lucky. That afternoon, Bridget found herself pacing the small confines of her room, nervous energy making it impossible to sit still. Tomorrow, she would begin learning English with Wade Garrison. The mountain man had been gruff and intimidating, but there had been something solid and dependable about him. He had looked at her with those storm-gray eyes and seen a problem he could help solve, and he had simply decided to do it. No elaborate explanations, no demands for payment, just a straightforward offer of assistance. She wondered about him. What kind of man lived alone in the mountains? Mrs. Sullivan had called him a trapper and a hunter. Bridget knew nothing of such occupations. In Lyon, men worked in shops and offices and factories. They wore neat clothes and lived in houses on cobbled streets. They did not have arms like tree trunks and shoulders like boulders and hair that fell in untamed waves past their collars. But this was not Lyon. This was Colorado territory, and the rules here were clearly different. The next morning, Bridget woke before dawn, too anxious to sleep. She dressed with care in her best remaining dress, a gray cotton with a modest neckline and neat buttons down the front. She twisted her hair into a careful chignon and pinched her cheeks to bring color to them. Then she immediately felt foolish. Why was she primping? This was a language lesson, not a social call. Wade was already in the parlor when she came down after breakfast, sitting on the worn sofa with a cup of coffee in one enormous hand and several sheets of paper spread on the low table before him. He looked up when she entered and nodded. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Bridget sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. Wade cleared his throat. "We start simple," he said in French. "I teach you words, you repeat, then I teach you how to make sentences. English is not like French. The rules are different. It will be confusing at first, but you will learn." He picked up one of the papers and showed it to her. On it, he had written a list of English words in neat, surprisingly delicate handwriting with French translations beside each one. "I stayed up late making this," he said, sounding almost embarrassed. "My French is not perfect, so some translations might be wrong. Tell me if something does not make sense." Bridget took the paper, scanning the list. Basic words. Hello, goodbye, please, thank you, yes, no, food, water, help. The translations were crude but comprehensible. She looked up at Wade with something like wonder. He had done this for her, had sat up late writing out vocabulary lists for a stranger. "This is good," she said softly. "Very good, thank you," Wade shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Let us begin." For the next 2 hours, Wade drilled her on basic English words and phrases. He would say a word in English, then in French, then make her repeat the English version until she could approximate the strange sounds. His pronunciation in French remained terrible, but his English was clear and careful, and he had surprising patience when she struggled with difficult sounds. "The TH sound," he explained in French. "Put your tongue between your teeth and blow air, like this." He demonstrated. Bridget tried, producing something that sounded more like a hiss. Wade shook his head. Again, "Watch my mouth," she watched, trying not to be distracted by the fullness of his lips barely visible beneath his beard. She tried again. "Better," Wade said. "Again." By the time Mrs. Sullivan appeared to announce lunch, Bridget's head was swimming with new words and her tongue ached from forming unfamiliar sounds. But she had learned perhaps 30 English words, and she could construct a few basic sentences. "You learn fast," Wade said as they prepared to end the lesson. Tomorrow we do more. Over the following days, a routine established itself. Wade would appear each morning after breakfast and spend 2 to 3 hours teaching Brigitte English. His methods were practical rather than academic. He taught her words and phrases she would actually need: how to ask for help, how to buy food, how to introduce herself, how to refuse unwanted advances. He used objects around the room as teaching aids, pointing at the lamp, the chair, the window, and making her repeat the English words until she had them memorized in the afternoons. Wade worked around town doing odd jobs. Brigitte learned from Mrs. Sullivan that he was fixing the back steps of the boarding house, helping at the livery stable, and doing carpentry work for the general store owner. He earned enough to pay for his room and board, and seemed in no hurry to return to his mountain solitude. Brigitte spent her afternoons helping Mrs. Sullivan and practicing the English words Wade had taught her. She would walk around the boarding house pointing at objects and whispering their English names to herself: cup, plate, door, window, floor, broom. On the 4th day of lessons, Wade surprised her by switching entirely to English for the first time. "Today we only speak English," he announced. "You know enough now. You need practice using what you know." Brigitte's eyes widened in panic. "But I will not understand everything," she protested in French. Wade shook his head. "English," he insisted. She took a breath and tried. "But I will not. I do not." She struggled to find the words, her face flushing with frustration. Wade waited patiently. "Take your time," he said in slow, clear English. "Think about the words you know, put them together." "I do not know all words," Brigitte managed. "That is fine, I will help, but you must try." It was painfully slow at first. Brigitte would struggle to form even the simplest sentences, often having to stop and ask Wade how to say a particular word. But gradually, haltingly, she began to communicate. Wade would correct her gently, repeating her sentences back to her with the proper grammar, and she would try again. During a break in one lesson, Mrs. Sullivan brought them coffee and cookies. As Wade reached for a cookie, his sleeve pulled back, revealing thick forearms covered with old scars. Brigitte stared at them without meaning to. "From animals," Wade explained in English, noticing her gaze. "Bears. Mountain lions. Wolves. The mountains are not safe. You must always be ready to fight." "You fight bears?" Brigitte asked in halting English, her eyes wide. "When I must," Wade said matter-of-factly. "I try not to." "But sometimes a bear thinks you are a threat to her cubs, or she is hungry, or you surprise her. Then you have no choice." Brigitte shivered. The life Wade described was so far beyond her experience that she could barely comprehend it. "You are brave," she said. Wade shook his head. "Not brave. Just alive. Bravery is when you have a choice and you choose the dangerous thing. In the mountains, you often have no choice. You do what you must to survive." "Why do you live there?" Brigitte asked. "Why not here?" "In the town." Wade was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. "The mountains are clean," he said finally. "Simple. An animal tries to kill you, you fight it. You are hungry, you hunt. You are cold, you build a fire. There are rules in the mountains, but they make sense. Out here with people, the rules never make sense. People lie and cheat and hurt each other for reasons that have nothing to do with survival. In the mountains, everything is honest." There was something in his voice, some old pain, that made Brigitte want to ask more. But she sensed this was not the time, and her English was not yet good enough for such a delicate conversation. "I understand," she said softly, and she did, at least a little. Wade looked at her then, really looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Maybe you do," he said. The lessons continued. By the end of the first week, Brigitte could hold basic conversations in English. Her accent was thick, and she still stumbled over grammar, but she could make herself understood. More importantly, she could understand much of what was said to her, at least when people spoke slowly and simply. Wade seemed pleased with her progress. "You work hard," he told her one morning. "Many people do not work this hard to learn." "I must learn," Brigitte said. "I cannot live here if I do not speak English, and you are a good teacher." Wade looked embarrassed. "I just tell you words. You do the hard work of learning them." "You do more than that," Brigitte insisted. "You are patient. You do not get angry when I make mistakes. You explain things in ways I can understand. That is what makes a good teacher." Wade cleared his throat and looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. But Brigitte thought she saw a hint of pleasure in his eyes. That afternoon, Mrs. Sullivan sent Brigitte to the general store with a shopping list and money to buy supplies. It was the first time Brigitte had ventured out alone since arriving in Julesburg, and she was terrified. But she had her English now, crude and imperfect though it was, and she was determined to prove she could manage. The general store was dim and cluttered, its shelves packed with everything from canned goods to bolts of fabric to farming equipment. The proprietor, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles named Mr. Peterson, looked up when she entered. "Help you, miss?" he asked. Brigitte took a breath. "Yes, please, I need to buy." She consulted the list, struggling with some of the words: flour, sugar, coffee, salt. Mr. Peterson's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly surprised to hear her attempt English. "You are the French girl staying at Mrs. Sullivan's, are you not?" "Yes," Brigitte confirmed. "I am Brigitte." "Well, Miss Brigitte, your English is coming along fine. Wade Garrison teaching you, I hear." "Yes, he is a good teacher." Mr. Peterson chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day Wade Garrison played schoolteacher, but he is a good man, that one. Rough around the edges, but solid. You could do worse for a friend in this town." He gathered the items on her list, and Brigitte managed to complete the transaction without major difficulty. As she left the store, supplies in a basket on her arm, she felt a surge of pride. She had done it. She had communicated successfully with someone other than Wade. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. Wade was repairing the boarding house's back steps when she returned, stripped down to his undershirt in the afternoon heat, his massive arms and shoulders gleaming with sweat. Brigitte tried not to stare at the play of muscles beneath his skin as he lifted heavy boards with ease. She had never seen a man built like Wade Garrison. The men of Lyon had been soft by comparison, their strength theoretical rather than visible. Wade's strength was undeniable, written in every line of his powerful body. He looked up as she approached, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "How did it go?" he asked. "Good," Brigitte said, unable to suppress a smile. "Mr. Peterson understood me. We talked in English. I bought everything on the list." Wade's face split into a rare grin, transforming his features. "I knew you could do it." That evening at dinner, Mrs. Sullivan announced that word had come from the surveying crew. They were making good progress and would likely be finished within 3 weeks. Pierre Blanchard was expected to return to Julesburg by the end of August at the latest. Brigitte felt a confusing mix of emotions at this news. Relief that her uncle was well and would return soon. But also something else, something she did not want to examine too closely. In 3 weeks, Wade would return to his mountain home. The lessons would end. She would likely never see him again. The thought produced an unexpected ache in her chest. Over the next several days, Brigitte became aware of a shift in her feelings toward Wade. At first, she had seen him simply as her teacher, a means to an end, someone helping her acquire the skills she needed to survive. But as the lessons continued, as she spent hours each day in his presence, she began to notice other things. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when she successfully mastered a difficult phrase. the rumble of his deep voice when he laughed, which was rare but transformative when it happened. The gentle way his huge, scarred hands held the delicate pencil when he wrote out new vocabulary lists for her. The patience in every line of his body when she struggled with a concept and needed it explained multiple times. He was not handsome in any conventional sense. His features were too rough, too weathered by sun and wind. His beard was untamed and his hair perpetually disheveled. But there was something compelling about him, something solid and real that called to something deep inside her. She tried to dismiss these feelings. Wade was helping her out of kindness, nothing more. He had made no indication that he saw her as anything other than a temporary responsibility, a problem to be solved before he returned to his preferred solitude. And besides, what could someone like her offer someone like him? She was a city girl, soft and useless by mountain standards. She knew nothing of hunting or trapping or survival in the wilderness. They inhabited completely different worlds, but the heart, Brigitte was learning, did not care about logic. One afternoon during a lesson, Wade was teaching her words for various animals. He had drawn crude but recognizable sketches of a deer, a bear, a wolf, and a mountain lion. "These are the animals I hunt and trap," he explained in English, speaking slowly so she could follow. "The deer and elk I hunt for food. The meat feeds me through the winter. The bears and wolves and mountain lions I usually leave alone unless they threaten me, but sometimes I trap beaver and fox for their fur. I sell the furs in town and use the money to buy supplies I cannot make myself." "You live alone in the mountains all the time?" Brigitte asked. "Do you not get lonely?" Wade considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. "In the winter especially, when the snow is deep and I do not see another person for months at a time, but I have grown used to it. And there is a peace in the mountains that you cannot find anywhere else. The silence is complete. You can hear your own thoughts. You can be yourself without worrying what anyone else thinks." "What did you do before you lived in the mountains?" Brigitte asked, curiosity overcoming her hesitation. Wade's expression closed slightly. "I was a soldier," he said, "during the war. After it ended, I could not go back to the life I had before. Too much had changed. Too many people I knew were dead. So I went north to Canada, worked as a trapper for a while, learned the trade. Then I came down here, found a good spot in the mountains, and built a cabin. That was 5 years ago." "Do you have family?" Brigitte asked softly. "Had," Wade corrected. "Parents died of fever when I was young. I had a sister, but she died during the war. Her husband was killed at Julesburg. She just gave up after that, stopped eating, stopped caring. She was gone within 6 months." He paused, his jaw tight. "So no family." "I am sorry," Brigitte said, and without thinking, she reached across the small space between them and placed her hand on his. Wade looked down at their joined hands in surprise. Brigitte's hand looked impossibly small and pale against his massive, tanned, calloused one. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Wade carefully turned his hand over so their palms met, his fingers gently curling around hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked, something unspoken passing between them. Then Wade cleared his throat and gently withdrew his hand, and the lesson continued as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, and both of them knew it. That night, Brigitte lay in her narrow bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She could still feel the warmth of Wade's hand, the rough texture of his calluses, the careful gentleness with which he had held her fingers as if they were something precious and fragile. She had never been touched like that before. The young men who had courted her in Lyon had been all flowery words and elaborate gestures, but none of them had made her feel the way she felt when Wade Garrison simply held her hand. She was falling in love with him. The realization terrified her. What could possibly come of such feelings? In 3 weeks, her uncle would return. Arrangements would be made. She would start her new life in America, whatever that might look like. And Wade would return to his mountain solitude, alone as he had been before they met, unless something changed. The next morning, Brigitte came down to breakfast to find Wade already at the table, looking troubled. Mrs. Sullivan was fussing around the kitchen with unusual agitation. "What is wrong?" Brigitte asked in English, the words coming more easily now. Mrs. Sullivan wrung her hands. "There is a problem. A rancher about 10 miles from here has been having trouble with a rogue bear. The animal killed 2 of his sheep and charged one of his ranch hands. The rancher is offering $20 to anyone who can track it and kill it. Several men have tried and failed." Wade's jaw was set. "He asked me to do it, sent someone to find me this morning." Brigitte's blood ran cold. "You are going to hunt a bear, a dangerous bear." "Someone has to," Wade said. "If this bear has lost its fear of humans and started seeing livestock as easy food, it is only a matter of time before it kills someone. Better to deal with it now." "But it is dangerous," Brigitte protested, fear making her voice sharp. "You could be hurt. You could be killed." Wade looked at her and something flickered in his storm-gray eyes. "This is what I do, Brigitte. I know how to hunt bears. I will be careful." "When will you go?" she asked, her throat tight. "This afternoon. I need to gather my gear and get to the ranch before dark. The rancher will show me where the bear has been seen, and I will track it from there." The morning lesson was subdued. Brigitte could not concentrate on English grammar when her mind was full of images of Wade facing a massive, enraged bear. She had never seen a bear, but she had seen Wade's scars, had heard the matter-of-fact way he talked about fighting for his life in the mountains. The thought of him in danger made her feel physically ill. Wade noticed her distraction. "I will be fine," he said gently. "I have hunted many bears. This is not my first time." "But what if something goes wrong?" Brigitte asked. "What if the bear is faster or stronger than you expect?" "Then I will adapt," Wade said. "That is how you survive in the wild. You stay alert, you respect your opponent, and you adapt to whatever happens." After the lesson, Wade went upstairs to gather his gear. When he came back down, he was dressed in sturdy leather clothing and carried a rifle that looked well-maintained but well-used. A large knife hung from his belt, and he had a pack slung over one massive shoulder. Brigitte followed him out onto the porch. The midday sun beat down on the dusty street. Wade turned to her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "I will be back in a few days," Wade said. 3 or 4 at most. When I return, we will continue the lessons." "Please be careful," Brigitte said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Wade reached out and with surprising tenderness tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips brushed her cheek and Brigitte shivered despite the heat. "I will," he promised. Then he turned and walked down the street toward the livery stable, his long stride eating up the distance quickly. Brigitte watched until he disappeared from sight, her heart heavy with dread. The next 3 days were torture. Brigitte threw herself into work, helping Mrs. Sullivan with every task she could find, practicing her English relentlessly. Anything to keep her mind off Wade facing a dangerous bear in the wilderness. But every moment of quiet, every pause in activity, her thoughts flew back to him. Mrs. Sullivan noticed her distress. "He will be fine," the landlady said on the second evening, her voice unusually kind. "Wade has been taking care of himself in those mountains for years. A rogue bear is dangerous, yes, but Wade is dangerous too when he needs to be. Do not underestimate him." "I do not," Brigitte said softly. "That is not what worries me. I know he is strong and skilled, but accidents happen. Even the strongest, most skilled person can have bad luck." Mrs. Sullivan studied her for a long moment. "You care for him," she said. It was not a question. Bridget's cheeks flushed, but she did not deny it. "Yes. Does he know?" "I do not think so. I have not told him. What would be the point? He will leave when my uncle returns. He has his life in the mountains. I do not fit in that life." "Maybe not," Mrs. Sullivan said. "Or maybe you fit better than you think. Wade is a hard man to know, but I have seen the way he looks at you. Whatever he feels, it is not nothing." Bridget wanted to believe that, but she was afraid to hope. Hope was dangerous when the future was so uncertain. On the afternoon of the fourth day, Bridget was helping Mrs. Sullivan hang laundry in the backyard when she heard heavy footsteps on the front porch. Her heart leaped into her throat. She dropped the sheet she had been pinning to the line and ran around the side of the house. Wade stood on the porch, alive and whole, though exhausted. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he had a fresh bandage wrapped around his left forearm. But he was standing upright, moving under his own power, very much alive. Bridget did not think. She ran up the porch steps and threw her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. Wade staggered slightly, surprised by her assault. Then his arms came around her, holding her close. He smelled of sweat and leather and wood smoke, and Bridget had never smelled anything so wonderful in her life. "You are alive," she whispered against his chest, her words a mix of English and French. "Thank God you are alive." "I told you I would come back," Wade said, his deep voice rumbling through his chest. One of his large hands came up to cradle the back of her head, his fingers tangling gently in her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, locked together on the porch, until Mrs. Sullivan's voice from the doorway broke the spell. "Well, I am glad you are back in one piece, Wade." "What happened to your arm?" Wade and Bridget separated reluctantly. Wade touched the bandage on his forearm. "The bear got one swipe in before I shot it. Not deep, just a graze, but it bled like fury. I cleaned it and wrapped it. It will be fine." "Come inside," Mrs. Sullivan commanded. "I want to look at that wound properly. And you look like you have not slept in days." Wade allowed himself to be herded inside and installed at the kitchen table. Mrs. Sullivan unwrapped the bandage and examined the wound with a critical eye. 3 parallel cuts ran across Wade's forearm, angry red but clean. "You did a good job cleaning it," Mrs. Sullivan admitted. "I will put some salve on it and wrap it fresh. You keep it clean and dry, you should be fine. You are lucky the bear did not hit deeper." "The bear is dead," Wade said. "It will not threaten anyone else. The rancher paid me $20. He pulled a leather pouch from his pocket and set it on the table with a satisfying clink. Then he pushed it toward Bridget. "This is yours," he said. Bridget stared at the pouch in confusion. "Mine? Why?" "For your lessons, payment for my teaching." Bridget pushed the pouch back toward Wade immediately. "No, I cannot take this. You taught me out of kindness, not for money. And you risked your life for this money. It is yours." Wade pushed it back. "I do not need it. I have enough supplies to last me through the winter already. You need it more than I do. Take it. For when your uncle returns, you will want to have some money of your own." "No," Bridget said firmly, pushing it toward Wade again. "I will not take money you bled for." They glared at each other across the table, 2 stubborn wills locked in conflict. Mrs. Sullivan watched with barely concealed amusement. "You are both being foolish," she said. "Wade, if you want to give the girl a gift, give her something she will accept. Bridget, if Wade wants to do something nice for you, let him. Goodness knows he does not do nice things for people often enough. Do not discourage him." Wade and Bridget continued to stare at each other. Finally, Wade pulled the pouch back and stuffed it in his pocket. "Fine," he said. "But I am buying you a new dress. That one is worn through at the elbows." Bridget looked down at her dress, which was indeed shabby and worn. "You do not need to do that." "I want to," Wade said simply. "Will you let me?" There was something in his eyes, some question he was asking that went beyond the issue of a dress. Brigitte understood, though she could not have explained how. "Yes," she said softly. "Thank you." Wade nodded, satisfied. Then exhaustion seemed to crash over him all at once. He swayed slightly in his chair. "You need to sleep," Mrs. Sullivan said firmly. "Go up to your room. I will bring you dinner later if you wake up, but I suspect you will sleep straight through until morning." Wade did not argue. He pushed himself to his feet and headed for the stairs, moving like a man at the end of his endurance. At the base of the stairs, he paused and looked back at Brigitte. "Tomorrow we will continue your lessons," he said. "You have not practiced while I was gone, have you?" "I practiced every day," Brigitte assured him. "Good." He hesitated, then added, "I am glad to see you again." "I am glad to see you again, too," Brigitte said, her heart swelling at the simple words. Wade climbed the stairs and disappeared down the hallway. Brigitte stood in the kitchen, one hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating much too fast. Mrs. Sullivan came to stand beside her. "That man has feelings for you," she said quietly. "I would bet money on it." "I have feelings for him too," Brigitte admitted. "But I do not know what to do about it. How can this possibly work?" "Maybe it cannot," Mrs. Sullivan said. "Or maybe you will find a way. Love does not always follow the path we expect." The next morning, Wade appeared at breakfast looking much restored, though he moved carefully, favoring his injured arm. The lessons resumed their normal schedule, but something had shifted. There was a new awareness between Wade and Brigitte, a heightened consciousness of each other that made the air feel charged. When Wade's hand accidentally brushed Brigitte's while reaching for the same vocabulary list, they both froze. When their eyes met across the small table in the parlor, there were questions in both gazes that neither was quite ready to voice. On the second morning after Wade's return, he announced that they were going on a field trip. "You have learned English in this house," he said. "Now you need to practice using it in the town. We will walk around Julesburg and you will talk to people, ask questions, buy things. Real practice." Brigitte was nervous but excited. Wade led her down the main street, pointing out various businesses and explaining what each one did. At the general store, he encouraged her to ask Mr. Peterson about different items and their prices. At the hardware store, she practiced reading signs and labels. At the post office, Wade helped her learn how to send a letter. "You will want to write to your parents," he said. "Tell them you are safe and learning English. They will be worried." The thought had not occurred to Brigitte, but of course Wade was right. That afternoon, she composed a letter to her parents in French, explaining everything that had happened, assuring them she was safe, and describing Wade's kindness in teaching her. She hesitated over how much to say about her feelings but ultimately decided to keep those private for now. There would be time for such revelations later, if circumstances warranted. Wade helped her address the envelope and mail it at the post office. "It will take several weeks to reach France," he warned. "Maybe longer, but they will receive it eventually." As they walked back toward the boarding house, Wade suddenly stopped in front of a small shop Brigitte had not entered before. A hand-painted sign read, "Mrs. Keller's Dress Shop and Alterations." "Come," Wade said, opening the door. Inside, bolts of fabric lined the walls and several ready-made dresses hung on display. A plump woman with rosy cheeks looked up from a sewing machine and smiled. "Wade Garrison, what brings you here? You do not strike me as the type to need a new dress." "Not for me," Wade said dryly. "For her." He gestured at Brigitte. "She needs something practical, good fabric that will last, nothing too fancy, just serviceable and new." Mrs. Keller's eyes lit up with interest. "Oh, this is the French girl everyone has been talking about, the one you have been teaching English. Come here, dear. Let me get your measurements." For the next hour, Brigitte was measured and fitted and shown various fabric options. Wade sat patiently in a chair by the door, occasionally offering opinions when asked. They settled on 2 dresses, one a dark green cotton for everyday wear and another a soft blue wool for cooler weather. "I can have them ready in a week," Mrs. Keller promised. "I will make sure they fit you perfectly." Wade paid without flinching at the price, despite Brigitte's protests. As they left the shop, she touched his arm gently. "You did not have to do that. It was too much money." "I wanted to," Wade said. "You work hard at learning English. You deserve something nice." "Thank you," Brigitte said softly. Then, gathering her courage, she asked, "Why are you being so kind to me? You barely know me. Yet you have spent weeks teaching me, you bought me new clothes, you treat me like I am someone important. Why?" Wade stopped walking. They were in a quiet spot between buildings with no one nearby to overhear. He turned to face her, his storm-gray eyes serious. "At first, I helped because you needed help and I could provide it," he said slowly, clearly choosing his words carefully. "That is just what decent people do for each other. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. I started looking forward to our lessons. I started thinking about you when I was supposed to be thinking about other things. When I was tracking that bear and it charged me, my first thought after I shot it was that I was glad I would live to see you again." Brigitte's breath caught. "Wade." "I know this is complicated," Wade continued. "Your uncle will return soon. You have plans for your life here in America. I live in the mountains alone, and that is not a life most women would want. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is real. You are not just a responsibility to me anymore, Brigitte. You have become something much more important." Brigitte's eyes filled with tears. "I have feelings for you too. I was so afraid when you went to hunt the bear. I could not stop thinking about you being hurt or killed. When I saw you on the porch, alive and safe, I have never felt such relief. Wade, I do not know what we do about these feelings, but I am glad you have them. I am glad I am not alone in this." Wade reached out and cupped her face with one large hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "You are not alone," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, you are not alone." They stood like that, Wade's hand warm against Brigitte's face, the late afternoon sun slanting between the buildings to paint them in golden light. Then, slowly, carefully, Wade bent his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, as if Wade was afraid she might break. Brigitte rose on her toes to meet him, her hands coming up to rest against his massive chest. She could feel his heart beating beneath her palms, strong and steady. The kiss deepened slightly, still gentle but with growing confidence, and Brigitte felt something inside her unfurl like a flower in spring. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. Wade rested his forehead against Brigitte's, his eyes closed. "I have never felt this way about anyone," he admitted quietly. "I do not know what I am doing." "Neither do I," Brigitte said, "but maybe we can figure it out together." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, not caring who might see them, both feeling like the world had just shifted on its axis in some fundamental way. That evening at dinner, Mrs. Sullivan took one look at their joined hands and their faces and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Later, when the other boarders had retired and Wade and Brigitte were sitting in the parlor pretending to review vocabulary, Mrs. Sullivan came in with a pot of tea. "I am happy for you both," she said without preamble. "But I need to know what your intentions are, Wade. This girl is respectable. She is under my roof. Her uncle is a known man in these parts. I will not have her reputation damaged." Wade's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "My intentions are honorable. I care for Brigitte. I want to court her properly if she will have me. And if things progress as I hope they will, I want to marry her." But that depends on many things, including whether she wants that too and what her uncle says when he returns. Bridget's heart leaped at the word marry. Wade wanted to marry her. He had said it plainly in front of Mrs. Sullivan, staking his claim and his intentions for all to hear. "And you, Bridget?" Mrs. Sullivan asked. "What do you want?" Bridget looked at Wade, at his strong, honest face, at the hope and vulnerability in his storm-gray eyes. "I want to be with Wade," she said in careful English. "If he will have me, despite all the difficulties. I know his life is in the mountains. I know nothing of that life, but I want to learn. I want to try." Mrs. Sullivan nodded, satisfied. "All right, then. You may court with my blessing, but you will do so properly. No sneaking around, no closed doors, no inappropriate behavior under my roof. When your uncle returns, Wade, you will speak to him man to man and get his blessing. Are we clear?" "Perfectly clear," Wade said. "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan." After the landlady left, Wade and Bridget looked at each other, a mixture of excitement and trepidation in both their gazes. "Are you sure about this?" Wade asked. "Living in the mountains is hard, Bridget, very hard, especially in winter. There is no town nearby for help if things go wrong. No shops, no doctors, no other women to talk to, just me and you and miles of wilderness. Many women would find that life unbearable." "Maybe I will too," Bridget admitted. "I do not know, but I would rather try and fail than never try at all. Wade, you have shown me more kindness in these few weeks than I have known in years. You are good and strong and honest. If I have the chance to build a life with you, I want to take it." Wade pulled her close, wrapping his massive arms around her. Bridget pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling safe and protected in a way she had never felt before. Over the following days, their courtship proceeded under Mrs. Sullivan's watchful eye. Wade and Bridget continued their English lessons, but now the lessons were interspersed with conversation about the future. Wade told her about his cabin in the mountains, a sturdy structure he had built himself with a stone fireplace and a good roof. He described the rhythm of life there, the hunting and trapping, the long quiet winters, the explosion of life in spring. "It is beautiful," he said, his eyes distant as he remembered. "In the morning the sun rises over the peaks and turns everything gold. In the evening you can hear elk bugling in the valleys. At night the stars are so bright and so many that the sky looks white rather than black. I have lived there 5 years and I never get tired of it." "It sounds wonderful," Bridget said, and she meant it. The life Wade described was so different from anything she had known, but there was an appeal in its simplicity and beauty. "I could build an addition to the cabin," Wade said thoughtfully. "Make it bigger, more comfortable for 2 people. I could build you a proper kitchen, maybe even a small room for sewing or whatever else you might like to do. And if—" he hesitated. "If we have children someday, I could add more rooms as needed." The casual mention of future children made Bridget's cheeks flush. But the image Wade painted was appealing. A life built together in the mountains, children growing strong and free in the clean air, a family forged by love and choice rather than obligation. "I would like that," she said softly. Wade took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then we will make it happen. Somehow." 2 weeks after Wade's return from hunting the bear, word came that the surveying crew was on its way back to Julesburg. Pierre Blanchard would arrive within 3 days. Bridget felt her stomach twist with anxiety. Her uncle was the closest thing to family she had in America. His opinion would matter enormously. What if he forbade her relationship with Wade? What if he had other plans for her future? "We will face it together," Wade assured her. "I will speak to him honestly, explain my intentions, and hope he sees that I can provide for you and keep you safe. That is all any man can do." The day Pierre was due to arrive, Brigitte could hardly eat breakfast. She dressed carefully in her old gray dress, wanting to look respectable for the uncle she had never met. Wade put on a clean shirt and tied his hair back, making an effort to look presentable. The surveying crew rode into town in the early afternoon, a group of dusty, tired men on equally dusty horses. Pierre Blanchard dismounted in front of the boarding house where Mrs. Sullivan had sent word that his niece was staying. He was a compact man in his 40s with dark hair silvering at the temples and intelligent eyes that quickly found Brigitte standing on the porch. "Brigitte," he called, his French immediate and fluent. "Is that you?" "Oui, Uncle Pierre," Brigitte replied, coming down the steps. "I am so relieved to see you." Pierre swept her into a hug, speaking rapid French. "I am so sorry, ma petite. I sent a letter explaining I would be delayed, but clearly it did not reach you before you left France. I only learned 2 days ago that you had arrived and were waiting for me. Are you well? Has anyone mistreated you?" "I am well," Brigitte assured him. "Everyone has been kind, especially Wade." She gestured to where Wade stood at the edge of the porch, watching the reunion with careful eyes. Pierre turned to look at the mountain man, assessing him quickly. "This is Wade Garrison," Brigitte said, switching to English so Wade could understand. "He has been teaching me English while I waited for you. He has been very kind." Pierre's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Wade's size and rough appearance, but he stepped forward and extended his hand. "Pierre Blanchard, thank you for helping my niece." Wade shook his hand firmly. "It was my pleasure, Mr. Blanchard. Brigitte is a quick learner and a hard worker. She has done well." "May we speak privately?" Pierre asked, his English accented but clear. "I would like to hear what happened while I was away and discuss Brigitte's future." "Of course," Wade said. "Perhaps inside. Mrs. Sullivan has a parlor we can use." The three of them went inside, Mrs. Sullivan appearing long enough to show them to the parlor and offer coffee before discreetly disappearing. Pierre sat in a chair and gestured for Brigitte to sit beside him. Wade remained standing, his posture relaxed but alert. "Tell me everything," Pierre said in French. Brigitte explained the situation, starting with her arrival in Julesburg and ending with Wade's offer to teach her English and his subsequent courtship. Pierre listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the story progressed. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Wade and switched to English. "You have been courting my niece?" "Yes, sir," Wade said steadily. "With the full knowledge and blessing of Mrs. Sullivan and with appropriate chaperonage at all times. I have behaved honorably toward Brigitte." "I do not doubt that," Pierre said. "Mrs. Sullivan sent word that you were teaching Brigitte English and that you were a man of good character. But courtship implies intentions. What are your intentions toward my niece?" "I want to marry her with your permission," Wade said without hesitation. "I know I am not what you would have chosen for her. I am not wealthy or educated or refined. I live alone in the mountains, trapping and hunting, but I care for Brigitte deeply. I will work hard to provide for her and keep her safe. She will never want for food or shelter or protection while I draw breath." Pierre studied Wade for a long moment. "Do you have any idea how hard it will be for a young woman raised in the city to adapt to mountain life? Brigitte has lived her entire life in Lyon. She knows nothing of hunting or trapping or surviving in the wilderness. What happens when the reality of that life sets in and she realizes what she has given up?" "I have thought of that," Wade admitted. "I cannot promise it will be easy. But I can promise I will help her every step of the way. I will teach her everything she needs to know. And if she truly hates it, if she cannot adapt, then we will find another way. Maybe I could work in town part of the year, or we could build a house closer to civilization. I am willing to compromise and adjust," because she matters more to me than any particular way of life. Pierre turned to Brigitte. And you, ma petite, you barely know this man. Are you truly willing to bind your life to his? To go live in the mountains where you will be isolated and dependent on him for everything? Brigitte met her uncle's gaze steadily. Yes, I know it seems sudden and maybe it is foolish, but Wade is a good man, uncle. He helped me when no one else could. He has been patient and kind and honest with me always. When I am with him, I feel safe. I feel valued. He sees me, really sees me in a way no one else ever has. If he will have me, I want to marry him and build a life together. Pierre sighed deeply. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dusty street. Your parents sent you to America hoping for a better life for you. They imagined you would marry well, perhaps to a merchant or a clerk, someone who could provide stability and respectability. I do not know if a mountain man was what they had in mind. Perhaps not, Brigitte admitted, but they cannot make this choice for me. I am the one who will live with the consequences, good or bad, and I choose Wade. Pierre turned back to face them. If I refuse my permission, what will you do? Wade and Brigitte looked at each other. I am old enough to marry without permission, Brigitte said quietly. But I would prefer to have your blessing, uncle. You are my only family in America. Your approval would mean a great deal. And I would never ask Brigitte to go against her family's wishes, Wade added. If you refuse permission, I will step aside, no matter how much it hurts. I respect your authority as her guardian here in America. Pierre rubbed his face tiredly. I have been surveying in the wilderness for 3 weeks. I come back to find my niece has fallen in love with a mountain man and wants to go live in a cabin miles from anywhere. This is not what I expected. I know, Brigitte said softly. I am sorry to spring this on you when you have just returned, but we did not plan this, uncle. It just happened. Pierre looked between Wade and Brigitte, seeing the hope and fear in both their faces. Finally, he sighed. I can see you care for each other. And I cannot argue with Brigitte's assessment of your character, Mr. Garrison. Everyone I have spoken to in Julesburg speaks well of you. They say you are honest and hardworking and reliable. Those are qualities that matter. He paused, then continued. I will give you my conditional blessing. You may marry, but I want you to wait at least 1 month. During that month, Brigitte should see where you live, experience some of what her life would be like. If after seeing the reality of mountain life, she still wants to marry you, then you will have my full blessing. Is that acceptable? Wade and Brigitte looked at each other, hope blooming in both their faces. Yes, Wade said. That is more than fair. Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. Thank you, uncle, Brigitte added, switching to French. I promise I will make you proud. I hope so, ma petite, Pierre said gently. I truly do. The next week was a flurry of activity. Pierre had secured a position for himself with the railroad company's main office in Julesburg, and he rented a small house on the edge of town. He invited Brigitte to stay with him rather than at the boarding house, and she gratefully accepted. It was good to have family nearby again, to hear French spoken regularly, to have someone who knew her history and understood where she came from. Pierre and Wade circled each other warily at first, but gradually developed a cautious respect. Pierre could not argue with Wade's work ethic or his obvious devotion to Brigitte, and Wade appreciated Pierre's careful guardianship of his niece, even when it inconvenienced Wade's own desires. True to his word, Wade began preparations to take Brigitte up to see his cabin. He purchased supplies and borrowed a gentle mare from the livery stable for Brigitte to ride. The journey would take 2 days on horseback, with a night spent camping under the stars. I will come with you, Pierre announced, as a chaperone and to see for myself where my niece would be living. Wade agreed without hesitation. That is probably wise. They set out on a clear morning in late August. Brigitte wore her new green dress and sturdy boots that Wade had insisted she buy for the journey. She had never ridden a horse before, and Wade spent an hour teaching her the basics before they departed. She was nervous but excited, eager to see the mountains that Wade spoke of with such affection. The journey was like nothing Brigitte had ever experienced. They followed narrow trails that wound through valleys and up into foothills covered with pine trees. The air grew cooler and cleaner as they climbed. Wade pointed out landmarks and animal tracks, teaching Brigitte to read the forest the way he did. That night, they camped beside a clear stream. Wade built a fire with practiced ease and cooked rabbit he had shot earlier in the day. Brigitte watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he seemed completely at home in the wilderness. This was his element, she realized. Here in the mountains, Wade was not rough or out of place. He was exactly where he belonged. "What do you think so far?" Pierre asked her in French as they ate dinner around the campfire. "It is beautiful," Brigitte said honestly, "and harder than I expected. I am sore from riding and I am not used to sleeping on the ground, but I am glad to be here. I want to see where Wade lives." "He is a good man," Pierre admitted. "I can see why you care for him, but Brigitte, this life, it is so different from what you have known. Are you truly prepared for it?" "I do not know," Brigitte said, "but I want to try. What is the alternative? Stay in Julesburg and hope someone suitable wants to marry me. Work as a maid or a seamstress. Those are fine lives, but they are not the life I want. With Wade, I could have something more, something real and meaningful." Pierre smiled sadly. "You sound like your mother when she was your age. She was always the romantic one, believing love could overcome any obstacle. I hope she was right. For your sake, I truly hope she was right." They reached Wade's cabin the next afternoon. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a view of distant peaks that took Brigitte's breath away. The cabin itself was solid and well built, with a stone chimney and oiled hide windows. It was small, perhaps 20 feet by 20 feet, but it looked weatherproof and sturdy. Wade dismounted and helped Brigitte down from her horse. "This is home," he said simply. He opened the door and ushered them inside. The interior was neat and surprisingly clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A sturdy bed frame held a straw tick mattress in one corner. A table and 2 chairs sat near the fireplace. Shelves held supplies and tools. Furs were stacked in another corner, presumably waiting to be sold. "It is not much," Wade said, suddenly seeming self-conscious. "But I built it myself. It is solid. It stays warm in winter and cool in summer. I have a good well nearby, and the hunting is excellent in these mountains." Brigitte walked slowly around the space, taking it all in. It was small and rustic, nothing like the homes of Lyon with their multiple rooms and fine furnishings. But it was clean and well organized, and she could see the care Wade had put into building it. She could also see potential. The space could be made more comfortable. Curtains on the windows, perhaps. A rug on the floor. Better furniture. And Wade had promised to add rooms if they married. "Show me everything," she said. "I want to see the well where you store food, how you manage in winter. Everything." Wade's face lit up with relief at her interest. For the next hour, he showed them around his homestead. The well was deep and clean. He had a small root cellar dug into the hillside for storing vegetables and preserved food. A smokehouse for curing meat stood a short distance from the cabin. He had chickens in a sturdy coop, protected from predators by thick wire mesh. "In winter, the snow can get very deep," Wade explained. 10 feet or more. I have snowshoes for getting around. I trap in winter because that is when the pelts are thickest. I check my trap lines every few days. The rest of the time I stay close to the cabin, cut firewood, repair equipment, tan hides." "It sounds lonely," Brigitte said. "It can be," Wade admitted. "But if you were here, it would not be lonely anymore. It would be home." Pierre watched this exchange thoughtfully. That evening, as they sat around a fire outside the cabin, he spoke to Wade in English. "You have done well for yourself here. I can see you have worked hard to make this place functional and safe. But it is isolated, Mr. Garrison. The nearest town is 2 days away. If Brigitte became ill or injured, if you had a problem, help is a long time coming. That concerns me." "I understand your concern," Wade said. "And I cannot pretend there is no risk. But I know basic medicine and first aid. I have books on treating common illnesses and injuries. I am careful, and I would be even more careful with Brigitte here. And we could visit Julesburg every few months, more often in good weather. She would not be completely cut off from civilization." "What about children?" Pierre pressed. "If Brigitte became pregnant, there would be no midwife, no doctor." Wade's jaw tightened. "I have helped deliver calves and foals. It is not the same as a human birth, I know, but the principles are similar. And we could arrange for Brigitte to be in Julesburg for the birth, staying with you or at the boarding house. I would not take chances with her life or the life of a child." Pierre looked at Brigitte. "And you? Knowing all this, are you still willing?" Brigitte looked at the cabin, at the darkening mountains, at Wade's serious face in the firelight. "Yes," she said. "I am still willing. I will not pretend I am not afraid. I am. But I am more afraid of living a safe, small life than I am of taking this risk. Wade will take care of me. I believe that." "Then you have my blessing," Pierre said. "Both of you. Marry, build your life here, and may you find happiness in it." Wade's entire body seemed to relax, tension draining out of him. "Thank you, sir. I will do everything in my power to make Brigitte happy." "See that you do," Pierre said. "She is precious to her family. We have sent her halfway around the world in the hope of a better life." "Give her that better life, Mr. Garrison." "I will," Wade promised. "I swear it." They returned to Julesburg 2 days later. The month Pierre had insisted on waiting was nearly up, and plans needed to be made. Wade wanted to marry as soon as possible so they could return to the mountains before the first snows made the trip difficult. Mrs. Sullivan threw herself into wedding preparations with surprising enthusiasm. She helped Brigitte sew a simple but elegant wedding dress from white cotton fabric. Pierre arranged for the circuit preacher to perform the ceremony. Wade bought new clothes for the wedding, actual store-bought trousers and a shirt and jacket that made him look almost civilized, though his long hair and beard remained wild. The wedding took place on a sunny Saturday morning in early September. Most of Julesburg turned out for it, curious to see the French girl marry the mountain man. The ceremony was simple and brief, conducted in the parlor of Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house with Pierre and Mrs. Sullivan as witnesses. Brigitte wore her white dress and wildflowers in her hair. Wade wore his new clothes and looked profoundly uncomfortable but also impossibly happy. When the preacher asked if he would take Brigitte as his wife, Wade's "I will" rang out clear and strong. And when Brigitte said, "I will" in return, her voice was steady despite the tears in her eyes. They exchanged simple gold rings that Wade had purchased from the general store. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Wade kissed Brigitte gently, reverently, his large hands cradling her face as if she were made of spun glass. The townspeople threw a small celebration afterward, with food and music and dancing in the street. Brigitte was whirled from partner to partner, laughing at her own clumsy attempts at the unfamiliar dances. Wade did not dance, claiming he would step on everyone's feet, but he watched Brigitte with such obvious love and pride that more than one woman in attendance sighed at the sight. As the sun began to set, Wade and Brigitte prepared to leave for their new home. They would spend the night at Pierre's house, then depart for the mountains the next morning. Mrs. Sullivan hugged Brigitte tightly. "You come back and visit, you hear me?" The landlady said, her voice suspiciously thick. "I will want to know how you are getting on." "I will," Brigitte promised. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Sullivan. You helped me when I had nowhere else to turn." "You are a good girl," Mrs. Sullivan said. "You will make a fine mountain wife." "And Wade, you take care of her." "I will," Wade said solemnly. "You have my word." Pierre walked them back to his house, his expression bittersweet. At the door, he pulled Brigitte aside and spoke to her in French. "I wish your parents could have seen this," he said. "I wish they could know that you found someone who loves you so deeply. I will write to them tomorrow and tell them everything. They will worry, but they will also be happy for you." "Thank you, Uncle," Brigitte said, hugging him, "for everything. For bringing me to America, for protecting me, for giving Wade and me your blessing." "Be happy, ma petite," Pierre said. "That is all any of us can hope for." That night, alone in the room Pierre had given them, Wade and Brigitte lay together as husband and wife for the first time. Wade was achingly gentle, patient with Brigitte's nervousness and inexperience. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Brigitte felt a deep sense of rightness. This was where she was meant to be, in the arms of this strong, honest man who had learned her language just to hear her laugh. "I love you," she whispered in French, then repeated it in English. "I love you, Wade Garrison." Wade's arms tightened around her. "I love you too, Brigitte Garrison. More than I knew I could love anyone." They left for the mountains the next morning, their horses laden with supplies. Wade had purchased enough food and goods to last them through the winter, supplemented by what he would hunt and trap. The journey back to the cabin took 2 days, just as before, but this time Brigitte felt no nervousness. This time, she was going home. The first months in the mountains were hard but also joyful. Brigitte had to learn everything from scratch: how to cook over an open fire, how to preserve food, how to manage the chickens, how to help Wade cure hides and process meat. Her hands, soft from years of city living, developed calluses and small cuts. Her body, unused to such physical labor, ached constantly at first, but Wade was patient, teaching her each task with the same careful attention he had used when teaching her English. And slowly, Brigitte adapted. She learned to read the weather in the clouds and the wind. She learned which plants were edible and which were poison. She learned to use a rifle, though Wade made her practice extensively before he would allow her to go hunting alone. Winter came early to the mountains that year. By October, snow was falling regularly, and by November, the world outside the cabin was a white wilderness. Wade checked his trap lines every few days, sometimes gone from dawn to dusk. Brigitte would watch from the cabin window, anxious until she saw his familiar figure emerging from the trees at day's end. The long winter nights were spent by the fireplace. Wade taught Brigitte to tan hides and sew leather. She taught him to read French, slowly and painstakingly, using the few books she had brought from Lyon. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. And when talking was done, they made love in the warmth of their bed, learning each other's bodies with growing confidence and joy. Spring came slowly, creeping up the mountains in gradual waves of green. As the snow melted, Wade took Brigitte exploring, showing her the hidden meadows and rushing streams, the places where elk gathered and where berries grew thick in summer. Brigitte felt herself falling in love not just with Wade but with the mountains themselves, with their wild beauty and harsh honesty. In April, Brigitte realized her courses had not come in nearly 2 months. Her breasts were tender, and she felt queasy in the mornings. She knew what it meant, but she was afraid to say it aloud, afraid to hope. Wade noticed her distraction one evening. "What is wrong?" he asked. "You have been quiet all day." Brigitte took a breath. "I think I am pregnant," Wade froze, his eyes going wide. "Pregnant, are you sure?" "Not completely sure, but the signs are there. I think it happened a month or two ago." Wade crossed the cabin in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. When he set her down, his face was split by the widest smile Brigitte had ever seen on him. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Brigitte asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy, Brigitte, I am ecstatic. Terrified, but ecstatic. We are going to be parents." As promised, Wade arranged for them to travel to Julesburg as Brigitte's pregnancy progressed. In her 7th month, they made the journey down from the mountains and took up residence in a room at Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house. Pierre was delighted at the prospect of becoming a great uncle and fussed over Brigitte constantly. Brigitte's labor began on a cold November evening. Mrs. Sullivan had helped dozens of women through childbirth and took charge immediately. Wade paced the hallway outside the room, wild-eyed with worry, until Pierre forced him to sit down. "She is strong," Pierre said. "She will be fine." After 8 hours of labor, Brigitte delivered a healthy baby boy. Wade was allowed into the room to meet his son, and the sight of the massive mountain man cradling the tiny infant with infinite gentleness made both Mrs. Sullivan and Pierre tear up. "He is perfect," Wade whispered, his voice full of awe. "Brigitte, he is perfect. What should we name him?" Brigitte asked, exhausted but happy. "You choose," Wade said. "You did the hard part." Brigitte thought for a moment. "Thomas, after my father. Thomas Wade Garrison." "Thomas," Wade repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world, son." They stayed in Julesburg through the winter, allowing Brigitte to recover and Thomas to grow a bit before attempting the journey back to the mountains. It was a good winter, full of family and friends. Pierre doted on little Thomas. Mrs. Sullivan knitted enough baby clothes for an army. And Wade helped with Thomas with a dedication that surprised everyone except Brigitte, who knew her husband's capacity for devotion. In the spring, they returned to the mountains with Thomas bundled securely. Wade had spent part of the winter adding a room to the cabin, creating a separate space for their son. Brigitte had worried about raising a child in such isolation, but Wade assured her they would make it work, and they did. Thomas grew strong and healthy, thriving in the clean mountain air. When he was old enough to walk, he followed Wade everywhere, learning about the forest and the animals. When he was old enough to talk, he spoke a mix of English and French, switching between the languages with unconscious ease. 3 years after Thomas's birth, Brigitte gave birth to a daughter they named Marie, after Brigitte's mother. 2 years after Marie came another son, Pierre, named for Brigitte's uncle. The cabin grew with the family, Wade adding rooms as needed. What had started as a small bachelor's cabin became a proper family home. Every spring and fall, the Garrison family made the trek to Julesburg. Pierre watched his great nieces and nephews grow with pride and delight. Mrs. Sullivan remained a fixture in their lives, always ready with advice or a sympathetic ear. The townspeople grew accustomed to the sight of the mountain man and his French wife, their brood of healthy, happy children in tow. Brigitte wrote to her parents regularly, long letters describing her life in the mountains, her beloved husband, her wonderful children. Her parents wrote back expressing amazement and pride. They sent gifts when they could, books, fabric, small toys for the children. And they promised that someday, when finances allowed, they would come to America to meet Wade and see how their daughter thrived. As the years passed, Brigitte sometimes thought back to that desperate girl who had stepped off the stagecoach in Julesburg, unable to speak English, terrified and alone. She thought about how different her life had turned out from anything she had imagined back in Lyon. She had expected to marry a clerk or a shopkeeper, to live a respectable but small life in some American city. Instead, she had married a mountain man. She lived in a cabin in the wilderness. She could shoot a rifle, tan hides, and deliver a calf. She spoke English as fluently as French. She had raised 3 strong children in the clean mountain air. And she had been loved, deeply and truly, by a man who had learned her language just to hear her laugh. It was not the life anyone had planned for her, but it was a good life, a real life, a life full of love and purpose and joy. One evening, when the children were asleep and the cabin was quiet, Brigitte and Wade sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Wade's arm was around Brigitte's shoulders, and she leaned comfortably against his solid bulk. "Are you happy?" Wade asked quietly, the question he still asks sometimes. Even after years of marriage, Brigitte thought about her answer carefully, as she always did. "Yes," she said finally. "I am happy. This is not an easy life, but it is a good one, and I would not trade it for anything." Wade kissed the top of her head. "I am glad. I still cannot quite believe sometimes that you chose this, that you chose me." "I chose correctly," Brigitte said firmly. "You are exactly who I needed, Wade Garrison. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You helped me when you had no reason to. You taught me not just your language, but how to be strong. How could I not choose you?" Wade's arm tightened around her. "I love you, Brigitte. More now than even when we first married. That surprises me. I thought love was like a candle, bright at first but slowly burning down over time, but ours keeps growing brighter." "Because we tend it," Brigitte said softly. "We work at it. We are kind to each other. We support each other through difficulties. That is what makes love last, I think. Not passion, though that helps, but daily kindness and respect and choosing each other again and again." "Then I choose you again," Wade said. "Every day, for as long as I live." "And I choose you," Brigitte replied. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, the mountains' dark silhouettes against the sky. Inside the cabin, their children slept peacefully. In Julesburg, Pierre was likely finishing his dinner, perhaps thinking of them. In Lyon, Brigitte's parents were waking to a new day, carrying their daughter in their hearts even across the vast distance. And here, on this mountain, in this wild and beautiful place, Brigitte had found everything she had been searching for without knowing she searched. A home, a purpose, a family, and most importantly, a love that was deep and true and lasting, born of patience and kindness, and 2 people who had been brave enough to choose each other despite all the reasons they should not. It was a good life, a full life, a happy life. And as the years continued to pass, through seasons and storms, joys and sorrows, births and deaths, that fundamental truth remained unchanged. Wade and Brigitte had found each other across language and culture and circumstance, and they had built something beautiful together. They had learned each other's languages, not just of words but of heart and soul. And in that learning, they had found a love that would last until their final breaths and beyond, into whatever waited in the mountains of eternity.